I'm Ian Castle, founder of Microcap Club, home to the best microcap stock pickers on the planet. Since 2011, our members have profiled over 1,300 microcap companies, with over 290 turning into multi-baggers. That's more than one big winner every single month for 14 years. If you share the passion for finding great companies early, before Wall Street and the institutions, Microcap Club is where you belong. Join us.
Joining us from Cormark Securities to give this pitch today, we have Nick Boychuk.
All right, thanks so much, guys. So I'm Cormark's Industrial Tech, and Diversified Specialist Hits Analyst. So it's genuinely my pleasure to be presenting Tantalus. I currently don't own any shares in this. Like the last guy, I wish I did. Our firm's been active with this name since their pre-pandemic IPO. I've been covering the story for about almost 3 years now. I think the most exciting part about this for me is that I've seen it now double. I've been enthusiastic about this the entire time. It's been one of my favorite pitches. But if you look at that stock chart, it's more than doubled in the last year. And at this point going forward, I've never been more excited. The conviction I have in terms of where this is heading, it's only going higher. So I think I'm going to kind of walk you through that story in 3 points. I think the first thing is thinking about how utilities need to modernize. This is an electric utility grid data modernization company. What they do is basically give utilities their first visibility ever into things like the edge of their grid. The way that they do it is highly unique. Their process, their go-to-market strategy, it's like nobody else in the industry. And when you think about that from I guess the business or the pitch, we'll go through their two different angles, both the legacy business and where this thing is heading. That legacy business provides stable cash flows. It's very recurring. That's going to give that kind of consistency. And then the new next generation product is the upside potential with the phenomenal growth. So I'm going to use this slide as the landing spot a couple times throughout this presentation, because one of the main things that I had to kind of wrap my head around when learning about utilities and grids is that these are all on a journey. No two utilities approaches this problem the same. And at any point in time, I'll use the baseball analogy because we're all kind of crazy about that in the city right now. You could have a utility on the left-hand side there that's literally in the first or second inning. They're just modernizing their grid. They're just bringing in advanced metering infrastructure. And you can have a utility on the right-hand side that's like the Energy and Power Board of Chattanooga, which we're going to talk a lot about. They're the most technologically advanced utility in the United States. They've done the best job sourcing government grants, funding, and you now have to work with that utility to integrate distributed energy resources. Most of the, I think, challenges come from the fact that our utilities and our grids are demand response. If you plug something into your power socket, you are going to get electrons back. And you will continue to do that until the system literally fails. And unless one of us picks up the phone and calls the utility and says, hey, my lights are flickering, or I don't have power, or the pole top distribution transformer is literally on fire, they will not know what is going on. And this is their first look into the visibility of what's going on there. So if you're thinking about that middle part, how they're helping these utilities, this is the first time many of them are ever doing this. So the legacy part of the business are these traditional meters. For us in Toronto, this wouldn't be anything new. We all have AMI 1.0 already. These meters just collect electricity consumption data and securely send it back to the utility. This is an example of one that the Energy and Power Board of Chattanooga bought from Tantalus, and so it would have been installed in the market. And that bottom left slide kind of or picture shows the distribution and kind of how Tantalus goes about addressing this market. You can think of the utility grid broken up into 3 different groups. So it's the investor-owned large utilities. That's like your Toronto Hydro, your Tampa Power Lighting. And then Tantalus's focus is in that municipal and co-op bucket. Those are smaller utilities. They're typically regional. They would have a number of members from 10,000 to 150,000, and they obviously don't have the same needs as the City of Toronto. That's the sweet spot for Tantalus. Now, you can see in the top graph, the modernization of those grids, it's a very long tail picture. It takes a lot of time to physically go out and install grids or meters at somebody's home. So the market itself, in terms of an evolution, has been growing at about a 9.5% CAGR for the last 10 years. And going forward, we're probably looking at about a 10 to 15% CAGR for Tantalus to take advantage of this opportunity. So in their subset, that small municipal regional co-op space, I roughly walk into about $1 billion TAM. And so for this business going forward on that legacy side, you've got about a 10 to 15% organic growth business. And when you look at Tantalus's user base, they've more than doubled it going back to 2018. They've had 0 churn since 2020. So once you gain one of these utilities, it's a highly sticky relationship, and they're very unlikely to then migrate to another vendor. And so this business, legacy again, doing 40 million top line, they've built up about 13.3 million ARR. That effectively backs into my 2025 estimates. You've got existing contracts that are still coming through, highlighting what that growth profile looks like. This summer they signed one with the California Riverside utility. It was $8 million up front. So it shows you like this demand is still coming through. 10% EBITDA margins, so it is very profitable. You're not going to see that though if any of you are looking at the historical financials or have looked at it before. It's kind of hidden in the last couple of years, and I'll kind of address that next, because when you think about where this business is going, one of the things that they've done so well is build partnership type relationships with a lot of their utilities. These guys aren't looked at as being vendors, they're looked at as being partners. These smaller utilities really rely on Tantalus, and that's something I've come to appreciate going to 2 years of their user conferences. And at the last couple of events, especially around like 2019, every single year Tantalus gives their customers, of which there were 300 this year who attended, an opportunity to voice where they're having issues and where they would want to have help getting some new hardware or new products to manage things. Every year, for a couple years in a row, they all mentioned it was the right-hand side of the grid. It's that distributed energy resource management. How do you incorporate, if somebody gets an EV, if somebody starts to incorporate smart appliances, or if you have bidirectional power, things coming back into the grid, it's impossible right now for them to manage that. And so they developed this product called the TrueSense Gateway. So there's 3 pictures on the slide here. The left-hand side shows the inside, the guts of it. It's a collar device, so that middle picture shows you basically just plug this into any ANSI meter socket, and then what it looks like once it's got the meter on the front of it. So it's very unobtrusive. It sits on the edge of the meter, and it collects 17 unique power quality data metrics. It takes any vendor's meter and immediately makes it 2.0, so you're automatically going into the next stage in terms of technological capabilities. And ultimately, again, if we're coming back to that baseball analogy, if you've got that utility, kind of like the Energy and Power Board of Chattanooga, who's in inning 7 or 8 in their modernization journey, this device literally allows them to go behind the meter and start to control assets. So if you have a summer heat wave coming through and everyone's got their air conditioners on and they recognize that they have parts in their grid that are getting stressed, the Energy and Power Board of Chattanooga can now throttle back somebody's electricity. They can now pause somebody getting an EV charge at 4 p.m. when power consumption is the highest. Conversely, they can then also pull power and create a data monetization program where you can now consume electricity back into the grid, basically leverage a microgrid, and then compensate the homeowner for that. Without this device, the TrueSense Gateway, you couldn't possibly do that. Tantalus then created a software platform, very easy to understand, actionable. You give this to each of these utilities, and because, again, these are smaller groups, they don't have the resources to consume that data, particularly if it's coming in from multiple different devices and multiple different vendors. So Tantalus has these dashboards. You can pull up any asset in the field on a map. You can see the consumption. You can see utilization rates. You can see the billing. Like, it's a remarkable system. We had them come up to one of our conferences. I think that was the highlight of the 18 meetings that we had in a day. This is an example on that right-hand side where one of the investor-owned utilities they work with, the United Illuminating in Connecticut, is now working with Tantalus, Savant, who's the smart meter breaker company, and GE to now do smart hot water heaters. So this is an example where United Illuminating every winter had challenges. Whenever a winter storm came through, it was ripping down power lines and they had consumption issues. They can now pre-charge people's hot water heaters days in advance before a winter storm comes through. So this is just one of the examples where a utility is trying to get ahead of the challenges that they have with their grid. So to go through kind of the history of TrueSense, I think is important because, again, I mentioned it was developed by the utilities themselves. There were 9 of them that came together to form an advisory committee. The revenue opportunity from just those 9 utilities is about $150 million. On that first slide, I showed that the revenue profile for this year is about $50 million. So just from 9 of the existing 327 utilities that Tantalus deals with, there's a $150 million revenue opportunity that would be actionable in 5 years. It took about $15 to $20 million in 4 years to develop the TrueSense, and so that's why if you look at the financials, I mentioned the earnings profile has been depressed. It's because Tantalus spent about $4 to $5 million every single year for 4 straight years, expensed all of it, none of it hit the balance sheet, and so it depressed the earnings profile, and by the time they got Underwriter Laboratory certification, which they've now received in full, it took a couple years. But now we're 2024 seeing all of those utilities that were in the sort of test environment moving into production. So what we have now is, instead of 9 utilities, there are 45 who are actively doing field trials and demos. One of the most important ones that's converted commercially is that Energy and Power Board of Chattanooga. So that's Tantalus's largest customer. It's their most important one, again, most technologically advanced. In the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, where they operate, there's 153 utilities, and every single one of them looks to EPB as being the thought leader in the space. And so as soon as EPB announced their contract, which was for 40,000 of these TrueSense units at $550 a pop, you're looking at like $30 million total, multiple, I estimate about 9 of them all started their field trials and demos after. So the expectation moving forward is that a lot of these utilities are going to start to convert a lot faster into commercial orders. If you think about it from the forecast and valuation standpoint, my numbers for 26 are 3x consensus. I think I'm being conservative, and I'm the only analyst right now who has 27 estimates out there. Part of this dynamic and challenge is that my numbers only include the Energy and Power Board of Chattanooga and the base business. I don't have any estimates right now for any of the other 45 utilities who would start to convert orders in. The challenge with this space is that you just don't know when they're going to act. You can have one who comes out of nowhere, places an order immediately, and you can have one who's going to be in your backlog for a year. That's a good and a bad thing because once they convert, they're never going to leave. But for me to forecast that, it's almost impossible. Regardless, though, if you look at those prevailing valuation metrics, for a business that's growing the way that this is, the fact that it's a perfectly clean balance sheet, those valuation metrics on EBITDA, PE, and free cash flow are all very reasonable. And if you think about it from a DCF, this is using an example where it's a basically prevailing revenue profile from the 45 utilities that they have their field trials and demos of. If you apply a 5% terminal free cash flow yield and a 10% cost of equity, this is a multi-bagger from here, and that also lines up with peer comps. So at some point, I would suspect that somebody larger in the space, Itron, Landis, and Gear, once they recognize what this revenue profile is, and I didn't really mention it, but an important part of the strategy from a competitive dynamic is that none of those players are addressing this opportunity the same way. Their business models are completely antithetical to the way that Tantalus is going about this. They want to sell more hardware and more meters. Tantalus is vendor agnostic, and they're also trying to extend the useful life of a lot of existing infrastructure in the field. That's a big differentiator, and so I don't think any of these guys are going to be able to come up with a competing product anytime soon. Instead, they're now trying to put NVIDIA chips inside meters. And so a meter that used to cost $100 and do a simple function is now going to cost $1,500 and have way more compute power than it would ever need. And so instead, Tantalus is again taking this partnership approach where they're just trying to help the utility modernize in a very intelligent and logical way. So if those guys were to wake up and try and take out this business, the multiple would be considerably higher. So to kind of wrap it up, again, I want to bring back the point about the data. That is without a doubt the most important part of this story. This is the first time these utilities are ever seeing infrastructure and assets that they have at the edge of the grid. The way that Tantalus is doing this, again, extremely favorable, long tail demand. It's going to be extremely sticky. And then with the catalysts as well, you've got the resilient cash flow coming in. They're going to have multiple more contracts rolling through. I think they're going to have a lot of forecast revisions higher. And this is a management team who is both highly incentivized, but also, like, I truly admire them. It's been a pleasure to work with them, and seeing kind of how they've thought through this business, how methodical they've been with capital allocation, and how disciplined they are. I have every belief that this stock is going to be $10 or more in a couple of years. So that's the pitch. Thanks, guys.